Is year three the critical year for player development in the NFL? Sean McDermott thinks so. We're going to put that to the test today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino from the Draft Network, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Happy Thursday to you, and thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day. And as a reminder to you, we are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Well, folks, one of the most fascinating items that came up repeatedly this week, particularly on Tuesday, when Sean McDermott was making the media rounds at the NFL Scouting Combine, whether it was his press conference or during the interview that he had with Steve Tasker and Chris Brown on One Bills Live, was his comments about player development and year three being the vital year in determining what a player is actually going to be in the NFL. And so we are going to commit today's podcast to those comments. We're going to talk about what he said about that. Then we're going to look at the Bills draft picks and consider the reality of year three for those players that made it to year three. And then I want to close by really digging into the players that are entering year three that are going to provide that defining season for the Buffalo Bills. Now, I've already kind of spoiled what we're going to do at the end, and that's talk about the current Bills players entering year three, which are Gregory Rousseau, Boogie Basham, Spencer Brown, and Tommy Doyle. But a few days ago, I asked the YouTube audience to leave me a comment regarding your appetite for paying Tyler Bass a $5 million per year extension. And I really enjoyed reading through those comments. And so as we continue our discussion today, I would love to read comments from you about what your expectations are for Greg Rousseau, Boogie Basham, and Spencer Brown, and Tommy Doyle in their third season. And if you have a take about one of them or all of them, let me hear about it in the comments. So fill up those comments, and I'd love to get your feedback as I have this conversation today. All right, so let's examine what was said by Sean McDermott that has got us to the point where we're going to have this conversation today. This is what he said, and this is a quote from One Bills Live. He said, quote, "It comes back to time. It used to be under the old rules that we had more time with the players, especially in the offseason. That time has been reduced, so time on task, like anything, comes into play. It used to be year two was the litmus test of can the player do X, Y, and Z, and now it's, hey, we need to give them until year three to really see who they are as a player." Now, just immediately reacting to that, I think there's a lot of truth to that, at least for the Bills. And we're going to dig into that reality. But I do think it's important for us to distinguish what wasn't said in those comments and clear up some misconceptions that I see about Sean McDermott and his appetite for playing or not playing rookies. Sean McDermott didn't say we don't play guys until year three. He didn't say I don't like playing rookies. He didn't say that year three is going to be their breakout season and we're going to get the best version of the player. He said that we're going to allow them until year 3 to see who they really are as a player. That year 3 will really reveal their true self. But I want to go back to the comment about, because I see this a lot, Sean McDermott doesn't play rookies. Not only did he not say that, but his behavior clearly states otherwise. Rookie starters under Sean McDermott, I got a list for you, since he's been the head coach of the Bills in 2017. Trey White, Zay Jones, Matt Milano, Taron Johnson, Josh Allen, Tremaine Edmonds, Ed Oliver, Cody Ford, Devin Singletary, Dawson Knox, Greg Rousseau, Spencer Brown. And those are just starters, not to mention guys who had significant roles as rookies. So please tell me more about how Sean McDermott doesn't play rookies. He does. Now, this year, the rookie snap counts didn't measure very well compared to the rest of the league. I think the Bills were somewhere in like the bottom 6 or 7 in the league in terms of rookie snaps. But I think that's just more about where the team is in its life cycle. And I know that you're going to say, well, the Kansas City Chiefs had one of the 5 highest amounts of rookie snaps. Well, that's because they made a calculated choice to gut their defense and draft a bunch of rookies on defense and let them play. And it worked out for them. But, like, understand the context of all these numbers. Sean McDermott plays rookies. So now with that established, again, I want to get into a couple more things that he didn't say. He didn't say players can't make an impact in year 1 or year 2. What he did say is that we need to give a player until year 3 to really see who they are. So what I want to do in just a moment is examine the Bills draft picks under Sean McDermott and consider if year 3 truly was the season that they arrived and we gained the clarity necessary to know who they're going to be in the NFL and what it meant for them reaching their full potential. But first, I do need to tell you about FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. So let's put it to the test. Let's look at the history of Buffalo Bills draft picks in year 3 under Sean McDermott, and what did we learn about those players? Now, the criteria here is we're going to look at players that were a draft pick and were also on the Bills for 3 seasons. Or for some players like Zach Moss and Isaiah Hodgins, we'll talk about them in just a moment, Zay Jones, guys that at least started year 3 with the Bills. So let's do it. We'll start with the 2017 crop of players. And again, year 3 for that 2017 class was 2019. First player, Trey White. Now, Trey White was an immediate impact player. I think he's been a pretty consistent player up until the ACL tear in 2021 on Thanksgiving. Now, year 3 for Tre'Davious White did produce a career high in interceptions with 6, a career high in forced fumbles with 3. He didn't allow a touchdown pass, and he had a career low 51.4 passer rating against his coverage. I think it's probably fair to say that 2019, year 3 for Trey White, was his best season, although I think he was really good in year 1 and year 2. So I'd say that Trey White passes the test here in terms of year 3 being that defining season. How about Deion Dawkins? Now, Deion's another player to me that I think has been fairly consistent throughout his career. But 2019, year 3 for him, was a big validation season. Dion had a really good rookie season. But then in 2018, year 2, that offensive line was a mess, right? And I talked about this back in 2019, but I'll bring it up now. For Dion Dawkins going from his rookie season with Richie Incognito and Eric Wood playing next to him at left guard and center to the mess that was 2018, which included Russell Bodine and Vladimir Dukas having to play those snaps. I think that hurt Dion Dawkins in year 2. But then in year 3, he blossomed and validated all that promise that we saw in year 1. So I'd say Dion Dawkins fits this as well. How about Matt Milano? Matt Milano's rookie season, he gained more and more playing time throughout the course of the season, platooned a lot with Ramon Humber. But we kind of knew he was an exciting young player. Then he became a full-time starter in year 2, and I thought he was excellent. And he continued that into 2019, year 3, which proved to be his most prolific tackling season. 2019, year 3 for Matt Milano is still the only 100 tackle season of his career. So with Matt Milano, I'm not sure that year 3 was this big revealing season so much as it was a validation of all the flashes and that he could be a reliable starting linebacker for the Bills. So in a way, I think they gained the clarity necessary in year 3. Now let's get to Zay Jones. And this is going to be a different conversation than the first 3 players. Zay Jones, wide receiver, second-round pick by the Bills. Year 3 was not we gained clarity on who Zay Jones is in the NFL. I mean, it was quite the opposite. Kind of bottomed out in Buffalo in year 3 in 2019. After, say what you want, some production in year 1 and year 2, all things considered, right? Year 1 with Tyrod Taylor and Rick Dennison's offense. Then year 2, a rookie player in Josh Allen who, was very erratic. And so in year 3 for Zay Jones, after kind of some strange offseason issues, starts the year very inconsistent and was traded to the Raiders. And then he was quiet with the Raiders for the rest of 2019. He was really quiet in 2020, had a little bit of production in 2021, and then signed with the Jaguars in the offseason leading up to 2022, and he had his big breakout season this past year. So year 3 didn't prove to be the magic year for Zay Jones, but I think it's fair to say a case could be made for the other 3 players from this class that it was. So yes, for Trey White, Dion Dawkins, and Matt Milano, no for Zay Jones, but good for Zay Jones that he kind of pieced it together, signed like an $8 million a year contract after a pretty good 2021, strong season in 2022, and you feel like he's going to be a big part of that Jaguars offense, moving forward. So that's a 2017 class. Let's get to 2018, and their year 3 was in 2020. And we'll start with Josh Allen. This is the easiest conversation we're going to have. Yes, 2020 was the year that Josh Allen turned into an elite NFL starting quarterback where you knew what you had, and the Bills gave him all the money after the season. So that's cut and dry. Tremaine Edmonds is next. And Tremaine Edmonds, to me, his best season, the year where we really gained clarity on him, was this year, year 5. But maybe with Tremaine Edmonds, we have to look at him a little bit differently. He just played his age 24 season, which is a typical age for a player in their 3rd season in the NFL. Most guys are drafted, they're like 21 years old, 22, something like that. Tremaine was drafted at 19. Like, we're talking about a different situation here with Tremaine. So with Tremaine, I mean, obviously a productive starter, the flashes were present, but I don't think the legit consistency arrived until this year. Moments, right? You like the skill set, you like the impact in some ways, but even as a Tremaine Edmonds stan that I consider myself to be, I had a lot of disappointment towards Tremaine Edmonds. It was just kind of continuing to bet on traits and the development and the trajectory and what I thought he could be. And here we are. It winds up working out. He's going to make a ton of money here in a couple of weeks. But I don't think that Bill's got that clarity until year 5. But again, if we look at him through that those normal ages, I think you can maybe look at Tremaine a little bit differently. Harrison Phillips fits into this conversation. And year 3 for Harrison Phillips was tough. He's coming off of the ACL tear in year 2, and we really liked those first couple of games was like the Giants and Bengals in 2019. Looked really good, tore his ACL, out for the season, came back in year 3 and had his moments. I thought he started slow, but towards the end of the season, he really turned it on. And then in year 4, Harrison played his best football, and that earned him a pretty nice contract with the Vikings last offseason. So again, given the injury with Harrison Phillips, maybe we look at him a touch differently, because in his 3rd season of actually playing in the NFL, I think we learned a lot about who he is, and that obviously led to a nice contract extension for him, or not extension, contract agreement with the Vikings. Next player is Taron Johnson, and I think Taron Johnson fits this year 3 deal. It was the first season that he was healthy for all 16 games, which mattered a lot. I think we enjoyed Taron Johnson as a rookie and in year 2, but you're just with shoulder injuries, you're kind of concerned that he was always going to be banged up. Well, he got healthy all year long for year 3 and has really been healthy since. Maybe missed 1 or 2 games along the way, but him proving his health and then really claiming that slot role in the defense, as the Bills, if I'm not mistaken, this kind of coincided with Lorenzo Alexander and his retirement, and then the Bills being a lot more of a base nickel defense, and Taron Johnson really coming into his own in that role. So I think Taron Johnson, the magic year for him was year 3. Last player from that 2018 class is Siran Neal. I think it's fair to say that Siran Neal has never arrived on defense, but his special teams role really increased in year 3 for him, and he became extremely valuable to the Bills from a special teams perspective. And maybe the best way that I can validate that with you is that in his first 2 seasons, Siran Neal played about 250 special team snaps in each year. I think 248 in one and 252 in the other. Since year 3, he's played above 320 special team snaps every year. So that trust and that opportunity really came along for Siran Neal to the point where he got a nice little contract extension after year 4. So that's the 2018 class. And I think for the most part, it matches what Sean McDermott said about year 3 being that defining year for players. 2019. And these players would be year 3 players in 2021. So last season, when I say last season, not like 22, but 2021. Ed Oliver, the Bills' first-round pick that year, I think absolutely, yes, 2021 was Ed Oliver's best season. If you remember, coming out of that year, that was the year that the Bills had to make the decision on picking up his 5th-year option, which some people are now upset about. But coming out of that season, it felt like an absolute no-brainer conversation. Pick up the 5th-year option, and you get Ed Oliver for another season at a little over $10.5 million, something like that. So, yes, I think that was an important year for Ed, and I think we've all learned that, along with tight end, defensive tackle is one of the slowest developing positions in the NFL. A big jump for him coming out of Houston, being a odd front nose tackle to being a 4-3 even front penetration style 3-tech. It was a big jump for him. And obviously, as an undersized player with short arms and a lack of mass, it's even harder. And so I think the Bills gained clarity on Ed Oliver and his ability to be a good starter. And maybe there's still some meat on the bone and some greater levels of impact that you want to see. But I do think that year 3 provided the clarity that speaks to Sean McDermott's philosophy here. Cody Ford's the next player. I'm not sure that he's ever really arrived. I mean, got a chance to start as a rookie, bounce around through positions, had some big-time injuries, never really became a player that you viewed as a reliable starter. So maybe year 3 provided that clarity, but even with the Cardinals this year, Cody Ford just struggled. So I just think he's probably a backup in the NFL. Devin Singletary is the next guy. I think it's very fair to say that 2021 was the season of gaining that clarity on Devin Singletary. It was his most productive season as a runner. It was his most productive season in terms of touchdowns. And if you remember, late in the season in 2021, he really came on. That was one of the biggest storylines going into the playoffs was, all right, the Bills have a run game, and it's because of Devin Singletary. So I do think that this holds up through the lens of Devin Singletary. Next player is Dawson Knox. I mean, this is easy, right? Along with Josh Allen, Dawson Knox is one of the poster boys for this year 3 breakout situation for players on the team. I mean, Dawson Knox went from a player everybody just had all their doubts about after year 1 and year 2 to, oh my goodness, the Bills have a tight end in year 3, came on, was really good, cleaned up a lot of the inconsistency, both as a blocker and as a pass catcher, and got an extension. And proved this year that that's what he can be. So, yeah, I think we did gain that clarity for Dawson Knox in year 3. Next player is Jaquan Johnson. And I think like Saron Neal, Jaquan's never really arrived on defense. And his special teams usage has been pretty consistent since his second season. But again, year 3 isn't necessarily defined as their breakout season or their best season. It's when McDermott feels you truly know what a player is going to be in the league. And so opportunity wasn't really there for Jaquan Johnson. But then when it came in year 4, I think we realized that Jaquan Johnson's a special teams player that you really don't want on the field defensively. The last player from that class is Tommy Sweeney, who has had a very quiet career as a tight end 3. I'm not sure there was ever anything there. I mean, just a very modest ability. And obviously had some injuries and even the heart issue along the way that's been challenging for him. I think he's been a good teammate, those types of things you hear about, but he's been a quiet player as a tight end 3. I'm not sure that there's been any moments of clarity with Tommy Sweeney that you felt like you really had something. The last class I want to get to here before we talk about the Bills' year 3 players for 2023 is that 2020 class. And year 3 for them was the season we just watched in 2022. Remember, the Bills didn't have a first-round pick that year. They traded that for Stephon Diggs. So A.J. Epinesa was your first pick. And maybe A.J. Epinesa is not good enough as a second-round pick and that you wish he was better. But year 3 was clearly A.J. Epinesa's best season, 6.5 sacks. I mean, he had 2.5 in his first 2 seasons combined. A.J. Epinesa was clearly at least validated himself as a rotational player, right? Like you wouldn't mind him playing 20% of your snaps as your defensive end 4. So yeah, I think Bills gained very important clarity on Epinesa in year 3. Zach Moss. Well, Zach Moss was traded in year 3. And in 8 games with the Colts, he averaged about 46 rushing yards per game. I think with Zach Moss, I think he's kind of proven that he's not going to be more than a replacement level RB3 in the NFL. Gabriel Davis. Well, I think it's pretty fair to say that Gabe Davis had his most productive season. There's no doubt about that. The team remains very confident in him, despite some of the concerns that I have about his skill set. But, I mean, you listen, I don't want to rehash this, but I mean, the McDermott and Bean love him. They rave about this guy. They gush about him. So the production's there, and it certainly feels, at least from their perspective, like they know who he is and what he's going to be. Tyler Bass. I mean, Tyler Bass has been really good. He had some issues early on, and I thought it was all kind of holding. More holding was failing him with Corey Bojorquez. But, I mean, he really stabilized as a rookie, was outstanding in 2021, probably should have been a Pro Bowl kicker, and then validated 2021 with a really good 2022 season. Kickers are probably a little bit different in this conversation, but I think we look at Tyler Bass as an upper echelon NFL kicker that we all have confidence in and are happy that he's on the Bills. 2 more players to get to. The next one, Isaiah Hodgins. Isaiah Hodgins provided a nice answer for the New York Giants. Wind up in 10 games, including the playoffs, 42 catches, 459 yards, 5 touchdowns, which is especially impressive when you consider that it was his real first opportunity to play in the league. You consider not being part of the Giants. I know that Brian Daboll certainly had familiarity with him, but that matters. But it's also Mike Kafka calling plays. It's also a different quarterback in Daniel Jones on a team where they had nothing at receiver. To come in and provide that production across 10 games is really, really impressive. He didn't have a single drop pass, was 7 of 11 in contested catch situations. I mean, year 3, really checked out for Isaiah Hodgins, and I'm glad he got that opportunity to do that with the Giants because I'm not sure what happened with the Bills. So, yeah, year 3 provided great clarity on Isaiah Hodgins. The unfortunate part is that he's just not going to be a player that actually helps the Bills. Last player is Dane Jackson. Gained extended playing time in year 3. I wouldn't call it a breakout season, but I think the clarity for what he is was gained from Dane Jackson. I don't think you can come out of last year with Dane Jackson and feel like, yeah, this guy probably should be a starter. But I think you gained important clarity to know that, hey, you know what? I think he's a good backup corner. And so, again, not a breakout season, but through that lens of, did you gain that clarity of who the player is? I think you did with Dane Jackson, and it's fine. He's a backup. And 7th round pick, that's a quality backup. So that's a good result. It's a good end game. So we have now learned that this checks out, which leads us to probably the most important thing we're going to talk about today on the podcast is the Bills draft picks entering their 3rd season right now. So we're going to break down what to expect right after this. I'll be right back. So the Bills have some players entering year 3. And this year has that year 3, as we've established, has proven to not only be a great season of clarity, but also for some players, and I would say even most of the players we talked about, a breakout season. And that's exciting because the Bills could use breakout seasons for the players we're going to dig into, which are Gregory Rousseau, Boogie Basham, Spencer Brown, and Tommy Doyle. Now, the rest of the Bills draft class from 2021, I mean, you have Marquez Stevenson not on the team anymore, Rashad Wildgoose not on the team, Jack Anderson not on the team. You also have DeMar Hamlin, and I as I've stated, I'm just not comfortable speculating on his future. So we'll leave him in a bucket by himself. But Rousseau, Basham, Brown, and Doyle. I think what's exciting about those 4 players in general, before we get specific with them, is that they are all players in the trenches, which, we know the Bills got to get better in the trenches. Well, here's 4 young players entering their 3rd season, 2 of which are probably going to be starters. I would say Rousseau and Brown are going to be starters. And Basham has a chance to be the defensive end 3. Tommy Doyle can maybe challenge for a guard spot or at least be a swing tackle. So there are 4 players entering year 3 that are trench players, 2 on offense, 2 on defense, but they're also very, very gifted in terms of physical traits. They all have all the size and athleticism you could ever want. You find it in these 4 players. Probably the worst athlete of these 4 is Greg Rousseau, who's the best player. So let's talk about them more specifically. Greg Rousseau, obviously the first guy I want to get into, entering year 3. I like the path that he's on. Strong rookie season. Some flashes, right? He certainly disappeared down the stretch. McDermott talked about him kind of hitting a wall. Came back this past season and was really impactful. Had 8 sacks, despite a high ankle sprain that caused him to miss some time. And, obviously not just missing time, but missing time with Von Miller, right? I mean, we didn't get to see those guys together long enough this year, in my opinion. But you like where he's headed. You like where he's headed, especially when you consider this guy only played defensive end for like 1 season at Miami. Was like a safety wide receiver when he got there, then was just crazy productive. Had a season with an ankle injury and then opted out due to COVID. Comes to the NFL and is a day 1 starter and has just gotten better and better. Love the run defense, and I love the growth as a pass rusher. I mean, if the Bills get the ceiling of Greg Rousseau next year, that's going to be a big deal for this defense, especially if they're without Von Miller for any length of time. So I'm excited about this for Greg Rousseau. Let's get to Boogie Basham. Now, Boogie Basham has athleticism. He has a very urgent motor. Like, he plays extremely hard. I like his hustle. Just hasn't made an impact with any level of consistency to this point. And so my expectations for him are tempered, I think, due to two reasons. Number one is what we've seen for 2 seasons. And then I wasn't quite as high as some on Basham entering the NFL. I thought he was like a 3rd or 4th round pick. So my expectations for him are as a rotational type player and spot starter. Obviously, even in a 20 to 30% of the snap type deal, you want more out of Boogie Basham as a young athletic player. So through the lens of getting the clarity necessary on a player, I'm happy that we're going to get that from Boogie this coming season. Now, you hope that it tells a good story, but it could also just tell you more of the same, and then you know, right? Okay, he's a replacement level rotational defensive end. But him turning it on in year 3 would be huge. Spencer Brown at right tackle. I think he's going to enter the season as the favorite to be the Bills starting right tackle. I mentioned this yesterday on the podcast when Brandon Beane talked about the offensive line and what they had. He said, we have Dion, Mitch, Bates, and Spencer. And then talked about Roger Saffold as an expired contract. I think they view him as a starter. And if you listen to this podcast regularly, you're going to be very sick of me saying what I'm about to say about Spencer Brown, but you have to be mindful of the context. Played tight end in 8-man football in high school. He goes to Northern Iowa. He plays 2 seasons at right tackle. His last season, the season is canceled for the FCS level. Gets drafted in the 3rd round. By week 4 of his rookie season, he starts, and I thought elevated the offensive line. It was up and down, and I think people gave him some grace given the stuff I just talked about. But then he goes into year 2, and I think a lot of people expected growth in year 2. But unfortunately, he lost the entire offseason due to a back surgery and the recovery from that. He didn't even really get ramping up until right up against the season opener against the Rams. And certainly had his struggles throughout the season. He had some good moments, but he got beat quite a bit. He had some mental breakdowns quite a bit. And this is a defining season for him. And so expected to be fully healthy this offseason to get ready to play, knowing that Spencer Brown is still, he's only got 4 seasons of his life playing offensive tackle. And knowing that he is supremely physically gifted in terms of size and athleticism. Just off the charts. The best athlete on the team. It's not close. One of the best athletes in the entire league when you consider size adjustment. That there's an appealing ceiling for him to develop into. Now, it has to happen. And maybe right now some of that promise feels empty to you. But I'm starting to feel like Spencer Brown might be my new Dawson Knox, right? And if you guys were with me, what was that, leading into 2021, and all the conversations about tight ends that year, and people were wanting to give all the money to Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry and trading for Zach Ertz and all this type of stuff. I'm like, I don't think so. I think I'm just happy with Dawson Knox. I think he can put it together. I think Spencer Brown's kind of entering that territory for me. And so we'll see. I'm not sure if I'm going to plant my flag on the hill like I did with Dawson, but I have some optimism for Spencer Brown. I think at a minimum, we're going to find out, and hopefully find out in a good way. But we'll get that clarity. It's a big year for Spencer Brown, and the Bills need that to happen. The last one's Tommy Doyle. Tommy Doyle, again, I don't know if he's going to start, right? I think that would probably be unlikely, especially coming off of an ACL tear, right? He tore it in week 3, so he should be healthy. You don't really have any concerns about him being available. But can he at least be a 4-hole backup, potentially jumbo tight end, the Bobby Hart role, which he filled before it was the Bobby Hart role? Can you get more out of him? I think you can. Like I said, at a minimum, 4-hole backup, primary swing tackle, potential jumbo tight end. the best case scenario is that this guy blows you away and he's your starting left guard and he's an impact player. That's probably an unlikely outcome. That's probably aggressive. But I think he'll get a chance to show if he can do that. But those are the guys. Those are your players entering year 3 that are reaching that make or break season, that clarity year, that for seemingly all players, you've developed enough of an understanding of who they are, but for a lot of these players, it's their breakout year. And I mean, the Bills could use it in the worst way from all these dudes. And then you kind of couple that with growth from the rookies from this past year, guys like Kyrie Elam and James Cook, providing a bit of a bigger impact. Khalil Shakir, right? And that's really how this team's going to get better. I know we're all excited about new players, right? Free agent signings, draft picks. I am too. But this right here is so critical in the evolution and improvement of your football team. And with Sean McDermott making those comments on Tuesday, like 3 different times, it really provoked me to dig into it. And so that's what we did here today. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. Tomorrow on the podcast, we're going to take a little spin around the AFC East, I think. You know, as we are in the final week before the new league year. So next week, I'm going to do free agency previews. I'm going to do my mock off season next week, which is going to be really fun. Good stuff coming next week to get ready for free agency. But I think it's an appropriate time to consider what those dynamics are for the Bills' rivals in the AFC East as they enter the offseason, so that we can be mindful of that, because we know how important the division is. You got to win that division if you want to get to the playoffs and host playoff games. So we're going to take a spin around the AFC East tomorrow on the podcast to close out the week. So come on back. Make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.